Washington Journal continues.
We're looking at issues of budget cuts, particularly when it comes to the Defense Department. Marion Blakey from the Aerospace Industries Association joins us. She's their president and CEO. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you first start by telling who you represent?
Yes, I represent the aerospace and defense manufacturers. So this is essentially the manufacturers of everything that flies, whether it's commercial, military, space, 360 companies.
And what are some of the names that people might recognize from those you represent?
Oh, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, but there are a lot of smaller companies too, Murata Controls. We have a lot of small business suppliers as well.
The effects of sequestration on our top-tier customers, the direct contractors to the government, have inseparable effects on the supply chain. In fact, the vast majority of the economic impact of sequestration will fall on small and medium businesses.
People come to us and say, are you worried about the future of sequestration? What's going to happen down the road with it? We're already seeing impacts right now.
We're a small, disadvantaged woman-owned business. And as a result of that classification, we already have a small niche in the marketplace. I'm concerned that that niche would actually become even smaller.
Well, one of the issues with a smaller firm is we don't have as much visibility up and down the supply chain as some of the larger firms. Already start pulling back and just be hesitant to maybe cut that purchase order.
A company can't make hiring decisions or will delay hiring decisions. A company will put off purchasing more property, plant, or equipment. So there's this ripple effect that is just going to devastate our economy right when it was starting to come back.
The aerospace and defense industry, through this economic time, has been the one to maintain jobs and to create jobs. And our business has grown. And to now have to start to deplete that, I think will have a detrimental effect.
You have to come to grips with the impact that it's going to have on the jobs, and the jobs in the aerospace industry, and the trickle-down jobs that it will impact.
If sequestration comes in, I may find myself not adding 50 jobs, but cutting 50 jobs.
What we're looking at with sequestration are layoffs. In the state of Ohio alone, there's close to 40,000 jobs that are at stake. We're currently needing multiple engineers to fill various roles. And the first question that comes to us is, with sequestration, am I going to have a job in 6 months? And quite frankly, we really don't have the ability to commit to that.
We've already seen jobs shrink in our company as a direct effect of the threat of sequestration. And those are real jobs because the orders aren't coming in.
If there are cuts here across the board, if that were to happen here in America, then yeah, sure, I think that jobs might go overseas, and I'm very concerned about that as a small business owner.
I think any blanket cut in the budget with no thought behind it makes no sense for this industry. Unless you critically look at each segment and what's manufactured in each of those, it's a poor decision.
So our concern is when you take away those dollars and you don't have that investment going on, you've got to restructure and readjust if your revenue goes away. There's only so much internal R&D that we can fund as an organization of our size. So I think we're concerned going forward for the impacts of sequestration on high-tech defense suppliers, small businesses like us.
And we've really got to think about what are we doing to sustain our business, sustain our economy, grow it for those that come after us. It's not what do we do to solve the problem today. The problem's far bigger than that, and if we're not thinking about the future, we're not going to come with the right solution.
Sequestration is devastating. It's a fiscal cliff. It is a blunt force approach to cost cutting, which will not solve the problem.
If major programs are cut even further, I'm really concerned about the disastrous effects it's going to have on us as a supplier in the aerospace industry.
What is the way to solve those budget challenges versus the potential impact to a critical industry that not only has defense implications, but has economic implications as well?
This isn't a thing in the future. This isn't some big wave coming over the horizon that we have to worry about. We're currently being impacted by this. We're currently not being able to attract talent or retain talent because of the fear of impending doom.
You've been giving out, and you gave this to me before the start, this clock when it comes to taking a look at sequestration, and it's a digital clock, and it shows about 96 days left. What's important to know about that number from the people you represent?
Well, that the time is running out. We are running straight for this fiscal cliff everyone talks about, and the number of days is all that is left, 96, before the law goes into effect. That's what sometimes people don't realize, is this is a law on the books. It's not just a proposal. So we're facing reality unless we change it, and that's why we have the clock.
And does that reality preclude that nothing can be done about it during the lame duck session once Congress comes back after the election?
The lame duck session is what we're putting a lot of hope on, because we do believe that when the lawmakers come back, they'll get a dose of reality at home. People do not want to see this kind of undermining of our national security, and they certainly don't want to see the job losses that are going on with this. The Congressional Budget Office has told the lawmakers this will push us back into recession next year, 2013. So I think after they've had those conversations at home, they'll come back and we hope be much more realistic about dealing with the real problems, which are the debt, the deficit, the fundamentals of we're spending too much. Entitlement reform has got to be put in place, as does tax reform.
There's a story in Stars and Stripes newspaper yesterday taking a look at the defense industry, and a line says that contractors have begun sending out layoff notice to many of their employees, warning that the hefty cuts could reduce or eliminate existing military contracts. Do you see that happening amongst those people you represent?
Yeah, we're in a tight spot. There's a law that's been on the books since the 80s called the WARN Act, which requires that you give your employees notice, 60 days usually, 90 days in New York, that's a state law, if you're going to have massive layoffs and plant closures. And yes, unfortunately, that's what's already taking place, because remember, we had massive defense cuts last summer when the Budget Control Act went into place, $487 billion of cuts. And a lot of that is now forcing companies to close facilities, to stop lines, to really pull back, because there's no choice. The money's not there.
So the WARN Act also, as you call it, covers this situation. We don't even know exactly what's going to happen yet, and yet these actions are already taking place?
Well, the WARN Act covers any situation where you're going to have to do these kinds of massive layoffs. And so many of them are coming because last summer, Congress already took a huge whack out of defense. Now we're anticipating, beginning in January, we'll be in the same spot. And companies have an obligation to their employees. They have a responsibility to their shareholders. You know something is coming, you need to act on it, and that's what the WARN Act requires. So yes, we will see more pink slips, more layoffs this fall.
There's a gentleman at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments takes a look at defense issues. He's Todd Harrison, and looking at the budget, especially when it comes to sequestration, he says this: there will be 3 or 4 years before defense companies feel the full impact of sequestration. That gives industry more time to adjust employment levels through natural attrition and early retirements rather than forcing immediate layoffs.
Well, of course, coming from someone in the think tank who doesn't have bottom line responsibility in a major business, there's a difference in perspective, needless to say. He's certainly right that there are going to be increasing effects over time. But the fact of the matter is the cuts for next year are major cuts. And where you have to begin to cut, remember, is in the areas that you can. And that often goes to new equipment, that goes to R&D, it goes to the modernization programs, which is what we're counting on, goes to new equipment, that goes to R&D, it goes to the modernization programs, which is what we're counting on for our technological advantage anywhere in the world. It's much harder to cut in the operations, the maintenance, those underlying ongoing costs, the cost of basis. So remember, these are cuts across the board. They are mindless cuts. And where we think we're going to see the most up front will be in a lot of the defense industry that supply the technology.
If sequestration does take place, what happens to programs already current at defense contractors?
Well, we will see the cuts come into those programs without a doubt. We do not have the detail. This is one of the things that has been really difficult because industry really does not thrive on uncertainty. It makes, of course, boards of directors, the CEOs, everyone trying to make decisions in a fog of uncertainty that they don't know what is coming. So you tend to take the most conservative position because you have to. So right now, we do not know which programs are going to be hit and how hard. But it only makes sense to look at the fact that this is approximately a 10% cut on top of these already massive cuts and begin to say, look, we're going to have to prepare for it. And in many cases, you can't just close 10% of a facility, shut down 10% of a line. That's not the way it works. You have to make business decisions that therefore sometimes set aside an entire asset because it's no longer viable from a business perspective.
Before our current guest's position as President and CEO of the Aerospace Industries Association, Marion Blakey served a 5-year term as Administration of Federal Aviation Administration and our guest until 8:30 this morning. If you want to ask her questions, for our Democrats, 202-585-3880. For Republicans, 202-585-3881. And for Independents, 202-585-3882. And you can also send us a tweet at C-SPAN WJ. Is this a bipartisan issue as you go to Capitol Hill and talk about these things?
Believe me, it is very bipartisan, and one of the things that is certainly important to know is that leadership on both sides, the House and Senate Armed Services Committees, both Republican and Democrat, all agree that sequestration will be a disaster, and it's something that we need and must have an alternative to. It does have to be a bipartisan, balanced solution. That's what we're seeking. And we do see leadership really stepping up on both sides of Congress.
Where's the resolve then? How do you keep this thing from happening as far as congressional action is concerned?
Well, the problem is we're up against the law, and as you know, the Congress has had a great deal of difficulty legislating, getting actual laws on the books. So this one is going to have to be rolled back by a piece of legislation that they have to pass through enough of the 435 members who are willing to stand up and say, look, we made a mistake. This is bad public policy, and we need to step away from it and really do something that actually addresses our fiscal problems in this country. Because believe me, sequestration only takes a nick out of the debt and the deficit. It doesn't do anything to the fundamentals.
And this is before January 2nd of 2013?
January 2nd, 2013. It's roaring right at us.
Our first call is from Battle Creek, Michigan. This is on our Democrats line. Ralph, you're on with Marion Blakey. Good morning. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. I'm curious about defense spending. It seems to never stop increasing. We've had the war in Iraq now drags on for 10 years. That's cost us what, around $1 trillion? And then the war in Afghanistan has been dragging on for, is it 11 years now? And that's costing us only $500 billion. We spend a huge amount of the budget. Most of the, half of the discretionary defense, or discretionary spending in the country is on defense. I think the spending on military has doubled in the last 10 years. Now we have a $1 trillion deficit last fiscal year. So if this woman or, the defense hawks of the military-industrial complex want to increase defense spending, why doesn't that cry out for tax increases? If you want significant spending, if you want more spending, even though we don't have a major threat like the Soviet Union facing us, doesn't that require responsibility? And let me mention Simpson-Bowles. I think Simpson-Bowles calls for cuts in defense.
Well, caller, you put a lot out there. We'll let the guest respond. Go ahead.
It's interesting because people throw out a lot of figures having to do with defense spending, and only a few of them are right. Defense spending is, in fact, only 20% of the discretionary budget. So we need to start with some of those fundamentals. Another fundamental, of course, is that the defense of the country is the most fundamental responsibility, and I thought with some of those fundamentals. Another fundamental, of course, is that the defense of the country is the most fundamental responsibility in our Constitution. And we do have to see that that is maintained at an adequate level. No one I know suggests that we are in less dangerous times. In fact, the reverse is true. Cyber warfare, the terrorism threat that is out there, unrest, Iraq, Afghanistan still, but think about North Korea, Iran, and China is becoming a true competitor. Now, all of this argues for the United States maintaining its technological edge. That's what, frankly, has given us the kind of unlevel playing field that has worked so well all this time. But we're not going into a period that's safer. The question of taxes, how do you balance your budget, is a bigger question. And what I would suggest is this, that is, of course, what we elected our members of Congress to do, is to make those tough decisions, to figure out tax policy, to figure out what to do about entitlement spending. We are obviously spending in a way that cannot sustain Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Something is going to have to be done to reform those programs. And I think, as Senator Bowles argues for, as a number of other plans argues for, you've got to get a good balance. And that's something that our legislators need to address.